NUS is an anti-vacuum that is the binary existence of vacuum, which is also the fixed field of NUS. It exists because nothing ever that tends to exist remains at absolute zero and at rest. The assumption of anti-vacuum can be regulated by the fact of existence of the matters and the continuity of motion. As with the twitches in the fabric of vacuum, if you suppose it as a fabric, the small twitches that goes on due to the absence of absolute zero and continuity and the presence of continuity of motion that releases energy in long term that all just accumulates and centralize. Thus, NUS is a subatomic superparticle that decays into hundreds of heavier subatomic particles which may be known or can be known or have been known. NUS is whole and heavier weight particle essence of the partials, as it have to be said in a simple terms, and its field are the exposures of necessity for the equilibrium of the vacuum in a sense. So this is an essay by Rajan B. Acharya, NUS Exquisitus God Vulgaris, Part 2. The initial field of NUS is a vacuum, and NUS is an anti-vacuum that pairs to create an equilibrium. Or it can be said that the else space around NUS is the field of NUS, a subatomic superparticle created by its intensity. There are three probable natures of NUS: cyclic, linear, and static. The field of NUS neither expands nor contracts. It's static, just gets filled by the particles ejected after the decay. NUS is a point of origin whose particles spread on all the directions in an equal manner. The particles or universes formed within the field of the NUS expands till the end arc of the field. Now, let me explain about the types of NUS. The first one is cyclic NUS. It follows the pattern as decays, ceases, contracts, pulls in, expands, and decays. And the particles in the field of cyclic NUS expands, ceases at the cold end arc, gets pulled in, and expands. And it maintains the cycle from decay to decay, expansion to expansion. Now about linear NUS, it's like it decays and continues to decay. And the particles in the field of linear NUS expands, ceases at the cold arc, remains static, and reflects back to the thermal ages. Now about static NUS, it decays, ceases, and remains static. The particles in the field of static NUS expands, ceases at the cold arc, and remains static. Now let us look at the exceptions. Exception 1. At a certain point, NUS ceases to decay, and parallel to it, the released energies multiplied in the field of NUS will be equivalent to the energy of NUS that leads to the equilibrium state. Whereas as NUS ceases to decay, the energy source is cut off on the field. So whatever volume of energy expands, it expands within the level of equilibrium till the cold arc at max. NUS will be rotating on its own axis, whereas the universes and elements across the field will undergo intra-universal momentums and inter-field momentums on their own. Exception to this linear NUS. The continuity of decay leads to the continuity of released particles, or the particle release. The energy will continue to expand till the cold end arc, and as it will reach the arc, the condensation of thermal energies will make the end arc hotter and hotter. Now, either the end arc will expand or else the field of NUS will go reverse thermal reflections due to continuation in decay of NUS. The condensed thermal contraction will keep on going. If this be the condition, two things may happen. The field of NUS will get inflated, but if this happens, then the existence of the only NUS will get contradicted, which will put a question to this being the one in the fields of multiple NUSes, when in turn creates a question of the origin of the wholesome fields scattered around, which in turn gives birth to another point at a center, and the end may be somewhere else. Thus, if we take this, we must accept that our NUS is one of many anti-vacuums, and there are numerous other NUSes around, and those are expanding their space in ultimate vacuum. And given that the vacuum doesn't end at any point, yet this violates the binary existence of anti-vacuum itself and the origin of the NUSes. So assuming that there must be only one NUS or one anti-vacuum, the further inflation of the field of NUS cannot and must not happen. The next thing that happens is that due to the continuum of extreme thermal contraction within the field becomes saturated at a certain point and gets decayed, and the decaying energies of NUS can't go beyond its own axis. This will cause an extreme thermal pressure within the core of NUS for stabilizing itself, which leads to the decay of halt. This equivalent state will regulate forever, but in the equilibrium, field of NUS will be in the fiery state, or in simple terms, the NUS and the field will be core of the sun and circumference of the sun respectively, but never to expand or contract. Now in the cyclic NUS continues to decay and eject, but the field of NUS has a saturation point. When the field gets to that saturation point, then it stops taking any further decaying particles trying to eject into it. Then all the decaying particles get condensed and contracted within NUS. The continuum of decay and the condensed particle expansion within NUS will increase its density to its maximum point. As NUS reaches this point, it finally collapses within itself and pulls all the expanded elements and universes back. After the collapse of empty cold vacuum, will get filled back with ejected decaying particles, and the cycle goes on. Now let us discuss the NUS as the God exception. The static NUS, if the static NUS is taken to be an option, then we can get an easy pass and take it as a model for a calm and good nature of NUS. This also makes it simple to understand about the natures of motion in the post-equilibrium. This is the ideal base for both atheist and theist, as they can take it according to their belief, either to consider it NUS or God. In the linear NUS, If NUS is taken to be linear, then the ever-expanding and fiery equilibrium both will contradict the question of initial point of origin of God. Ever-expanding one may leave the NUS and its field into infinity vacuum ending in nowhere. This will question the existence and origin of one whole NUS or God. Also, the fiery equilibrium will question and dismiss the existence of God because God doesn't undergo equilibrium but establishes an equilibrium around him or it. In the cyclic NUS, if the NUS is taken to be a cyclic, then it will be easy pass with a cycle of creation and destruction, thus getting approved as a god. But for the physicist and the atheist, it will be a strange thing to consider NUS is both white and black supersubatomic particle, respectively and repeatedly occurring, though the white hole and black holes are just going simultaneous and syncing with each other in the particle physics and the quantum physics as well. Let's continue. So let us conclude and summarize. As NUS is an anti-vacuum, it needs to have a limited energy source, and thus when released, it at a certain point must cease to decay and also come into equilibrium state, pressured by the equivalence of external force released in the fixed field of NUS. But if the limited energy source of NUS is numerous times greater than the intensity of absorption in the field, then we must apply the continuous decay of NUS in it, which will lead us to two probabilities or possibilities: that the thermal saturation of the field that will give us a fiery equilibrium, or the thermal saturation of the field that will give us a cyclic NUS. If you take the field of NUS to be sufficient to absorb till equilibrium, then it's static NUS. If you take the field of NUS to be small enough to get well saturated at maximum point, then it's fiery NUS. If you take the field of NUS to be large enough to get saturated at large, then it's cyclic NUS. Thus, we can assume that the possibilities of fiery NUS may be minimum. There can be a static or cyclic NUS according to the assumptions. For further analyzing, the prototype of these small entities with the process of creation, destruction and regeneration across the universe, we may assume the cyclic NUS to fit in it. Thus we can or should we assume that NUS, who is busy to balance its thermal burden to achieve continuum and get to the reversal point back and forth as an immortal jellyfish in its juggernaut field, to be so precise, to be conscious or selective about just the human beings or any other inter-universal human beings with linguistic and philosophical consciousness? Why would it go ever smelling the back of the human beings when it has got a lot of tantrums for its own continuum? So what is the purpose of NUS? To make us believe it exists, who itself is a particle born out of an anti-vacuum regulation and is in continuous stress of its thermal distress.